This is all his idea, so blame him for everything that ensues. You saw that face, that was not guilt. So Jerry and I are both practitioners of different disciplines that come from the amazing subcontinent of India. And we're going to engage in a little dyad here today. And I think that you can kind of consider, when we tie this all together in the end in a meditation, that Jerry is the heart and I'm the head today. And I think it's important to discuss India because whether or not you know it, the people who founded Unity were deeply influenced by Indian traditions. The Fillmores, Charles Fillmore specifically, was very much inspired by Transcendentalism. And Transcendentalism, the Thoreau and Emerson were big studiers of Advaita Vedanta. They were big students of even Buddhism. So I think it's really interesting to see that this tradition here, the pluralistic nature of it, the way that it invites many paths, all paths to the oneness, stems from this amazing and rich tradition. In my bio, it mentions the word yoga, and that word is a very special word to me because it has been changed over the last 100 years or so to become a homonym. So much like the word cool, you know, it can mean something's, like my kids would say, on trend, or it can mean that the temperature is chilled, right? We all get that. Well, the word yoga has been appropriated. And it hasn't just been appropriated by us. It started in India about 100 years ago with Germans coming into India and introducing Western gymnastics. And then people kind of realizing, oh, I can hybridize this. I can make it contortion. And you know, now it can be often associated with affluence and skinny yoga pants, right? And I joked about it in first service how, think about how much a yoga retreat costs. I mean, does that sound like that's the path to enlightenment if you got to pay $1,000 and go on a cruise trip and work on sticking your leg behind your head? And you know what happens when you stick your leg behind your head? You get arthritis or you dislocate your hip. That's what happens. So originally those postures, the reason for the postures were they prepared your body to meditate. Because the idea is if your body is sore and stiff, sitting tall and sitting well can be distracting. And so the postures themselves were not meant to be, as my teacher calls them, a cult of the body. The word yoga, so this is where I'm the heady part and you'll see he's the heart part. The word yoga, you say it all the time when you come in here because it means unity. And what is that unity? That unity is the non-dualistic state that everything emerges from. Earlier today, when you guys were chit-chatting, if you got here before the service started, the 5 unity principles were up on the screen. And the first unity principle is that there's one power in the universe. And that power, for lack of another word, we're going to say is God. And I say lack of another word because even that word tends to contract it, because there can be an image in our mind when we hear the word God to associate it with something that has a head and arms and legs. You know, the word God for a lot of people can invoke the image of the Sistine Chapel and a man, a white man with very little clothing on, if at all. And that's not at all what this thing is. So yoga is the practices as well as the state that everything emerges from. And so when I say that my background is in yoga, it's in meditation, it's in contemplation, and it's in prayer, and it's in mantra. And today, my goal is to share with you the contemplative practice of the yoga tradition. Another name for that is the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And don't let the names fool you. That you can get tripped up on the names. But the word Advaita means non-dual. And in Vedanta, there's this rich tradition of, kind of like in the Talmud, in the Jewish tradition, of questioning and questioning, which might be very different than what some of you were raised with, because who was raised with just accept? No, don't question. Don't go into the paradoxes in the Bible and ask any questions. No, it's the absolute word of God. And this tradition asks you to set that aside and to press and to press and to press, because the idea is that what you are seeking is inside of you, right? And if we have these arguments and these dichotomies in ourselves, we don't recognize them, they're going to create disharmony. In yoga philosophy, we talk about your mind a lot. And your mind isn't just your brain. Your brain, I jokingly say, is the bag of noodles. You know, when you die, the brain goes, right? It's just your body. The mind is a field. It's an energy. And the mind it's important that we hone our mind because it is our greatest tool. And we'll talk about that a little more when I get to the second part of my dyad with Jerry. The mind, when it's cluttered, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, those great teachers talk about your subconscious tape. So when you're sitting here, you know, what's playing underneath? And the yogis have spent a lot of work on polishing that subconscious tape so that you show up fully in your life. Our subconscious tape has been greatly impacted by things like our parents and society and expectations. And what happens is we begin to identify with all of the roles that we're playing in our life. We identify with, maybe you see me, you see, oh, this is a woman, she's a black woman, she's wearing a turquoise dress, but I'm really none of those things, right? What I am is indescribable, and what I am is one and the same as yoga.
Thank you, Avril. It's a pleasure to be here with the most caring and friendly church. Reverend Richard and I were speaking yesterday about how great it would be if, as good as we are, we took it up a notch and became the most caring and friendly, the most welcoming church in the country, in all of America. So we may hear more about that. And if that actually occurs, I'm going to donate this little check I wrote last night. If it doesn't occur, I'll buy my wife a nice something. But for now, I want to tell you a tale from Mother India, a mystical encounter. And I hope that you have a mystical encounter today as well. Babaji, known as the Deathless Guru, because he comes and goes from his physical body to spirit body at will. And he's been doing that for hundreds of years. And in spite of that, he always looks to be in his 20s, bare-chested, hair down to his waist, glowing face. When he appears to a follower on rare occasion, that's how he is described. He still lives in the environs around the Himalaya mountains, and from time to time people get to see him, but not very often. In 2011, Bill McDonald, following heart attacks, was in the hospital for open heart surgery. He was not doing well, teetering between life and death. At one point, a dome of energy came over his bed, and into that dome stepped Babaji. Babaji, bare-chested, hair down to here, looking in his 20s, poured sacred healing oil on Bill McDonald's head and chanted in a strange dialect. And Bill got well. Went home doing pretty good, talking one day, and his daughter said, well, you know, my friend David came to see you while you were in the hospital. No, he didn't come to see me. I would remember that. Well, he didn't actually come into your room, because when he got to the doorway, what he saw was a man in his 20s, dark-skinned from India with hair down to here and bare-chested, pouring oil on your head, chanting in a strange dialect. Bill McDonald, wow, I didn't hallucinate it after all. I thought I made it up. Babaji doesn't visit people all the time. I was on high-powered drugs, but my goodness, it actually happened right here in the third dimension. Well, that's the same Babaji who 150 years earlier appeared to Lahiri Messiah and said he wanted him to revive Kriya Yoga to the world. Now, Lahiri was really special character. He acted normal. He worked for the British Railway. He had a wife and children, but in that earthly disguise, he was a God-realized being. Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, visited the widow of Lahiri Messiah in 1935 when he went back to India. He asked her to tell him a tale of her deceased guru husband. Okay, I will confess you a sin I committed against my guru husband, she said. Shortly after my initiation, I became depressed, forlorn. I felt neglected. He was never with me, he was with the students. So one day, she said, he came into this little room. I followed him in. I addressed him scathingly. You spend all your time with your chelas and your disciples. You never get enough money for us. I wish you would spend more time focusing on your family. Woof! Into thin air, he disappeared. From every corner of the room came, "It's all nothing, don't you see? How could a nothing," I love that, "how could a nothing like me provide riches for you? Oh, Master, Guru, my husband, please come back again. I can't see you. Come in your sacred form, please." I am here. Looked up to the ceiling, and there Master materialized. His eyes were like blinding flames. He slowly descended to the floor. I fell at his feet crying. He said, "Woman, don't spend your time seeking after earthly tinsel. Spend your time seeking after the inner rewards of heaven itself. Anyone who finds the joy and the light within will always have outward supply." Well, that seems to be how it works. When we find it within, the without comes. Miss Avril.
What I love about those stories in some of the great books, recent like Autobiography of a Yogi, but even ancient, which were originally transmitted orally. Well, and I talked about this in first service, that it's amazing that some of these scriptures were transmitted. Ooh, I don't know why you just said that, Siri, but I don't need anything. Yes. Something went wrong. Please try again. You got to laugh about it, right? No, I don't need you. All right. So
It's all
she was like, don't take it too seriously. So these stories were transmitted orally, and there's some recent research. I love the idea. Whenever we validate things that we are mystical with research, right? Like now we have to prove because we can mathematically evaluate this. But that people had better memory, and that these stories were passed on correctly, and they weren't terribly modified from generation to generation. And in a way, letting that go, we've gotten a wee bit lazy cognitively. Jerry threw around a term very quickly, and I don't know if you caught it, but he said, realized master. And in yoga tradition, in the Indian traditions, that is the pinnacle, the apical experience. The goal is self-realization. And self-realization is when you put down all of those identities that I mentioned before, that I'm a woman, that I have gray hair, that I'm black, that I'm American, and you merge fully with the truth of who you are, that you and that state that I mentioned, yoga, sometimes it's called turiya, sometimes we call it being enlightened, that you and that thing, that place, there is no difference. You're one and the same thing. And it requires audacity. See, the thing is, I know that many of us play small, that we think, oh, there's this Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. This was a person. It's not a god. This was a person. The word Buddha means woke, literally. Jesus, we think, oh, Jesus, because of our teachings, the way that we've been taught, he's up there, I'm down here. Well, in unity, we hold the Christ consciousness, right? But do you really, really believe that you are an enlightened master? Not that you have to become. The becoming is the waking up to that is your true nature. What we are in right now is what the yogis call Maya. It means the forgetting, the illusion. So in Vedanta, which is one of the traditions I mentioned, again, I said you don't have to remember the name, but it's the tradition where the contemplation comes from. And in my tradition, because there's debatably, depending on where you're coming from, 3 to 7 contemplations. And we have these 7 contemplations, and we use them to chew on, to sit with, and it's the distillate of all of the teachings. And I want to share them with you. And then after Jerry speaks again, we're actually going to do a contemplative practice today, because we want to work on putting good stuff in that substratum of our mind, so that in the background, when we're washing the dishes, when we're talking to our family, when we're sleeping, what comes up reminds us of our true nature, and not the temporary, not the ephemeral, not the untrue. So I'm going to say them in Sanskrit, but then I'll say them in English. Don't let the Sanskrit take away from it, okay? And the word that we're going to use to describe the indescribable, I love that image because it reminds me of what we call in yoga the bindu, or the pearl. And it's a convergence. All that stuff on the periphery is the temporary. And it's all going into and coming from the center, which is eternal, right? All right. So the word for that bindu, that ineffable, is Brahman today. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, which means Brahman is real. The temporary world, the material world, is unreal. Ekam evadvityam Brahma. Brahman is one, without a second. Prajnam Brahman. Brahman is the supreme knowledge. Not you have to have supreme knowledge to get there. It is supreme knowledge. This is my favorite one, and I want you to really take this, close your eyes even, and I want you to listen with your heart when I say this one. Tat Tvam Asi. That is what you are. I am Atman Brahma. Atman, that means your soul, and Brahman are the same. Aham Brahmasmi. This is where you have to be audacious. I am Brahman. And the last one is Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All of this is Brahma. In addition to these utterances, the Mahavakyas, there's also a practice of negation, which we'll play with a little bit later on. And in negation, we remove our roles, like peeling layers of an onion to get closer and closer. So if I say, oh, I'm Avril and I have this body, then I'll say these words, neti, neti, which means not this, not this. I don't really have a body. I'm not a body. It's just some clothing I'm wearing. Or if I say I am a program coordinator, like all that fun stuff that Danielle read that made me feel a little inflated for a moment. Netty, netty. I'm not any of those things. It's like a game. So little by little, we get closer and closer to the subtler and the subtler, to the truth of who we are.
Netty, netty. Not this, not that, but it could be chocolate silk pie. In fact, since you brought up chocolate silk pie, what a great time for me to say, Thanksgiving, I had a piece of chocolate silk pie downstairs. I've never found out who made that chocolate silk pie, and I really would like to know. So if anybody here or you know who brought that chocolate silk pie to Thanksgiving feast, let my wife or Linda or me know, and leave a phone number and I'll be in contact. And I'm serious. I love that. God gives us many gifts, and that was one. Another gift that I was fortunate to have most of my life was a spirit guide. I had several spirit guides, one at a time. I would have one guide, and then at some point that guide would say, I'm going to give you to somebody else. And well, okay, I would accept that. It was difficult at first when receiving a new guide to hear them in the inner voice because there's a different frequency, but we would get it. The last guide in the series of guides I had back when I worked with guides was Ananda Mai Ma. Now, had I known how famous she is, that she has students all over the world, one of India's most famous saints, I would not have had the gumption or the self-confidence to accept that she was going to be my guide. But I didn't know anything about her, so I accepted it pretty readily. I had been living in Wyoming. I was single at the time. It was winter, 2-bedroom apartment. 1 bedroom was my office, 1 bedroom was a bedroom. Walking down the hall one night, I look into the office, and there I see a spiritual light sparkle. A spiritual light sparkle is kind of something like a firefly you might see out in the backyard in the summertime, only it's wintertime and it's not a bug. It's a little spot of energy that goes ding and gets your attention. This particular time, I had the urge to follow it. So I walked into the office, put my index finger at the point where I'd seen the light, and just pushed it straight down till it was stopped by whatever was in the open desk drawer. It was paper. I slid my other hand under it, took it out to the living room where it was light, and began to look around, knowing that I would find a clue right away what that light had been hovering over. It was a map of Mexico, and I looked and looked. I wasn't finding anything. Finally, I lifted up my finger, and there under my fingertip, a little tiny town about 1.5 inches southeast of Durango, little town named Nombre de Dios. Nombre de Dios, name of God. I cried. I knew then Ananda Mai Ma was for sure working with me because her trademark, well-known distinction with her, how to work with her students to contact the divine, was to repeat continuously the name of God. And there it was, somehow all the way from India, and as she went into the great and eternal one life, making its way to Wyoming in that little 2-bedroom apartment into a desk, name of God. I was impressed. I still have that little piece of paper cut out, and it's on the post of my lamp in the room where I see clients. Here's a great story. You can find it in chapter 30 of Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. He's talking about miracles. We have the saying, one ship goes east, one ship goes west, yet the self-same breezes blow. 'Tis the set of the sail, and not the gale, that determines where they go. In New Thought, we teach that it's what's on the inside that sets up the outside. Our lives are not determined by circumstances. Circumstances originate out of us. One ship goes east, one goes west. 'Tis the set of the sail, not the gale, determines where they go. Okay. Leo Tolstoy had this wonderful tale, and it has a basis in history. There were 3 old hermits living on an island. They were very simple and very God-connected. They had only one prayer. We art 3. Thou art 3. Have mercy upon us. And the thing is, miracles occurred when they said this prayer. Local bishop found out they were saying this undignified, oversimplified prayer. Bless you. There goes one of the hermits now. So the local bishop got in a boat, went over to where they were at the island, got them together, and taught them the proper prayers. They were apparently grateful, and the bishop left, feeling very good that he had brought proper order. After being out on the water a ways, he saw a light. It's getting closer and closer and brighter. When it got about 30 feet from the boat, that ball of light opened up. It was the 3 hermits running on the water. Bishop, Bishop, we forgot your prayers. Please teach them to us again. We want to pray right. The bishop said, dear ones, please continue with your old prayers. We can conclude connection to God is more important than the words of our prayer. If you want to have a mystical encounter, ask God for one and get as close to God as you can.
As we're getting ready to transition into our time of contemplative meditation today, I want to invite the band to go ahead and become situated. Everything that Jerry shared, by the way, Anandamayi Ma is also my guide. So I don't know if I let you know that, Jerry, but you don't get to have the monopoly on that. But one of my favorite images of her is an old photograph, maybe from the 1930s or so, and she is kneeling at herself. There's her standing and her kneeling. And what she's teaching you is there's nothing outside of yourself. There's no one that you're praying to that's up in the sky, that you have to align with what you're looking for. And that image is one of the wallpapers on my computer. Jerry and this gentleman in the hospital, it's not like they were special. We're not special. Nobody's special. We're all exactly wonderfully even. We're all on even keel, on even ground. It's the barriers, it's the fear, it's the feeling that you're not deserving of enlightenment that holds you back from it. So I really want to pressure lovingly with the idea of being a little more audacious in what you're asking for, because who are you asking? Right? You're the wish-fulfilling tree, as I say. You're the wish-fulfilling jewel. And so it may be helpful to work on our subconscious tape a little bit. And that is what I would like to take you through today, is just imprinting some different things in that substratum. I made this joke earlier, and I hope it's well received again. I feel like my inner Richard, like, I don't know up here. Thank you for laughing. But the part of your mind where all of that stuff is played is called the chitta, and CH, you got it. And one of my teachers said, there's a lot of shitta in the chitta. So let's go through with a nice broom.